Have you ever looked into your child's eyes, knowing they were the fruit of your wife's betrayal? I kept that secret for 30 years, raising him as my own. But today, my son threw me into a budget nursing home and sold my house to buy his wife a diamond necklace. He thinks he's inheriting a fortune, but he doesn't know that as a former investigator, I've documented every cent spent on him as a private loan. The game of "zero" is over, and my bill is due. I stood there on the cracked pavement of "1", which looked more like a prison than a retirement home. The air smelled like bleach and despair. My son Mark didn't even look me in the eye as he handed my single suitcase to a nurse who looked like she hadn't slept since the 90s. He muttered, his fingers nervously twitching. It's stories like these that remind us how quickly family can turn. If you want to see how this all unfolds and catch the rest of my journey, consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps me share these lessons with you. The big house he mentioned was the home I'd spent 40 years paying off. It was the home where I raised him, tucked him in, and protected him from every storm. Now I saw his wife, Sarah, sitting in the car, tapping her manicured nails on the window. She was already browsing interior design websites on her phone.
They didn't just want me safe. They wanted me out of the way so they could liquidate my life. Mark reached out and snatched my car keys right from my hand. The cold metal leaving my palm felt like the final tie being cut. He said he had no idea that while he was planning my retirement, I had already finished planning his downfall. He thought he was outsmarting a confused old man, but he forgot who taught him how to think. As I sat on the thin, plastic-covered mattress of my new room, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony of it all. Mark thinks he's playing a high-stakes game of chess, but he doesn't realize I've been holding the winning card since 1995. You see, I wasn't always just a forgetful old man. I spent 30 years as an insurance investigator. My job was to find the lies people hide in the fine print, and I was the best in the business.
The biggest lie I ever found wasn't in a corporate office. It was in my own home. It happened when Mark was just 3 years old. I had been injured on the job and needed a minor surgery. While reviewing our family medical history and blood types for the doctors, the math simply didn't add up. Mark couldn't be mine. Biologically, it was an absolute impossibility. I remember standing in my kitchen, looking at my wife Linda as she laughed while feeding him. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I had the evidence in my hand, a cold, hard report that proved my marriage was a fabrication. I could have filed for divorce that day. I could have walked out and never looked back. But then Mark looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and shouted, "7." He didn't know about the betrayal. He didn't know about the other man. To him, I was his entire world. In that moment, I made a choice that would define the next 3 decades. I decided to be his father, regardless of the blood in his veins. I buried the truth so deep that even Linda eventually believed her own lie. I spent 30 years providing for him, paying for the best schools, and saving for his future. I treated him better than most biological fathers treat their own kin. And this is how he repays that devotion? By locking me away to steal my assets? He thinks he's entitled to my inheritance. He has no idea that every dollar I ever spent on him was meticulously logged in a ledger he's never seen. The debt is about to come due. A week passed in that gray room before Mark visited again. He didn't come alone. Sarah was with him, clutching a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly care fee at this place. They didn't come to check on my health. They came for my signatures.
Mark looked different. His face was harder, his eyes darting around the room with a mixture of guilt and greed. "Dad, we need to talk about the house," Mark said, leaning against the peeling wallpaper. "It's a lot of maintenance. Sarah and I think it's best to just clear it out. Put it on the market while the prices are high." I watched them through my senile mask. I let my jaw hang a bit, my eyes drifting as if I was struggling to follow the conversation. It's amazing what people will say in front of you when they think your brain is turning to mush. Sarah leaned in and whispered to him, not realizing how well my hearing aids actually work. "Tell him about the trust fund, Mark. We need that down payment for the mansion in the hills before someone else grabs it." They started talking about my life like it was a carcass they were picking clean. My vintage watch collection, the one I had promised to pass down to a grandson I might never have, was already listed online. My car had been traded in for a sleek European SUV that Sarah was currently driving. To them, I wasn't a man who had sacrificed 30 years of my life to provide for them. I was just a broken ATM that needed to be emptied one last time. Mark handed me a pen, his hand shaking slightly. I looked at the document. It wasn't for insurance. It was a power of attorney. They wanted total control. I signed it with a shaky hand, pretending to struggle with the letters. Inside, I was smiling. They thought they were taking my power, but they were actually walking straight into the legal minefield I had laid out years ago. Every item they sold, every dollar they moved, was being tracked by a system they didn't even know existed. They were digging their own grave, and I was just handing them the shovels. After they left, I pulled out a small, encrypted tablet I had hidden inside the lining of my suitcase. Being a former investigator means you never go into a situation without a backup plan. While Mark and Sarah were busy dreaming about their new mansion, I was busy watching them. I had installed tiny, discreet cameras in my old house months ago, disguised as smoke detectors and outlet covers. I knew this day would come. Watching the live feed felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah was in my living room, throwing my late wife's hand-painted porcelain vases into cardboard boxes. She barked at Mark. She even tossed my old leather-bound detective journals, the ones containing the secrets of my career, into a black garbage bag. Mark stood there, silent, watching her erase every trace of my existence from the home he grew up in. I wasn't just watching their greed, I was gathering evidence. In the eyes of the law, what they were doing was technically managing my estate. But they were doing it with such reckless disregard for my well-being that it bordered on criminal neglect. I was documenting every theft, every lie told to the bank, and every unauthorized transfer of my funds. But I wasn't just a victim, I was a hunter. Every night, after the nurses did their rounds, I logged into my offshore accounts. Mark thought he knew how much money I had. He saw the local bank accounts and the standard retirement fund. He had no idea about the private trust I had built over 30 years, a fund specifically designed to be untouchable by anyone but me. I spent those long nights in the facility connecting with old contacts from my investigative days. I needed more than just a lawyer. I needed a shark. I sent a message to a man named Arthur, a guy who specializes in, quote, 16 family estates. I typed. The following Tuesday, Mark burst into my room, practically vibrating with excitement. He held a thick stack of papers and a pen that looked like it cost $500. I looked at the papers. They had sold my 40-year legacy for a price significantly lower than its value, just to get the money faster. Sarah was standing by the window, checking her reflection in the glass and adjusting a new pearl necklace. I knew exactly where the money for that necklace came from. It was my, quote, 21 that Mark had raided the day before. I asked, my voice trembling slightly to maintain the act. He didn't even have the decency to look sad about the fact that he was essentially saying I would never leave this place. I signed the papers. As I handed the pen back, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was the point of no return. By selling the house and moving the money into an account he shared with Sarah, Mark had officially triggered the biological debt clause I had written into my private trust years ago. In his mind,
he was stealing from his father. In the eyes of the contract he didn't know existed, he was accepting a massive financial liability. He thought he was taking my gold, but he was actually picking up a burning coal. I said, looking him dead in the eye. He flinched. For a second I saw a flash of the little boy I used to love. But then Sarah coughed impatiently, and the moment vanished. They left the room laughing, already talking about the, quote, 26 party for their new mansion. They didn't realize that the party was going to be the stage for their public ruin. The following weekend, the facility held a family social. It was a pathetic attempt to make this place feel like a community. I sat in a plastic chair in the courtyard, watching the gates. To the nurses, I was just another resident waiting for a visitor who wouldn't show up. But I wasn't waiting for Mark. I was waiting for Arthur, my attorney. When he arrived, he looked exactly like the man you'd hire to dismantle someone's life. Sharp suit, cold eyes, and a briefcase that held enough legal firepower to level a skyscraper. We sat at a corner table. He handed me a folder. It contained the final records of Sarah's estate sale. She had been hosting an open auction at my old house, selling off items that weren't just furniture, they were my memories. My late wife's wedding dress, my father's military medals, even my old detective badges. She was selling them for pennies on the dollar to buy silk curtains for her new bedroom. My cameras caught it all. I saw people walking through my hallways, haggling over my life, while Mark stood in the kitchen, drinking my expensive scotch and laughing with the realtor. "Everything is ready, Jack," Arthur whispered, sliding a document across the table. "The moment they put the down payment on the new mansion using the funds from your house sale, the trap snaps shut. By using that money, Mark is legally acknowledging the debt structure we set up. You see, back when I found out Mark wasn't mine, I didn't just hide the truth. I worked with Arthur to create a conditional support agreement. Every dollar I spent on Mark's private schools, his college, his first car, and even his wedding was recorded as a, quote, 31 to his mother's estate. Since Mark had inherited her entire estate, he inherited those debts. He thought he was inheriting a fortune, but he was actually inheriting a bill that had been accruing interest for 30 years. He was selling my house to pay for a mansion, but legally, that money wasn't his to spend. He was committing fraud without even knowing it. I told Arthur. A week later, Arthur returned to the facility with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They did it, Jack," he said quietly. "Mark and Sarah officially closed on the mansion. They used every cent from your house sale and even took out a massive bridge loan to cover the rest. They're officially all in." I felt a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt since my days on the force. They were so blinded by the glitz of their new life that they hadn't bothered to check the title or the liens on my assets. To them, I was just a senile old man who had signed his life away. They didn't realize those signatures were the bait in a very sophisticated trap. That evening, I received a, quote, 36 from Mark. He sounded like he was standing in a room with high ceilings. I could hear the echo of his voice and the clinking of champagne glasses in the background. He was gloating. He wanted me to know exactly how much he had stolen, while I sat in a room that smelled like floor wax. Sarah's voice chirped in the background. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. I said, my voice steady and calm. He laughed. He hung up, leaving me in the silence of my small room. He had no idea that Arthur had already filed the claim of debt with the county clerk. The ledger was complete. Every tuition payment, every holiday gift, and every grocery bill from the last 3 decades had been calculated with compounding interest. The total was staggering, far more than the value of their new mansion. They thought they were starting a dynasty, but they were actually standing on a sinking ship. The night of the gala arrived. using a hefty, quote, 43 fee I'd prearranged with the facility director. I walked out the front gates in a tailored suit I'd kept hidden. Arthur was waiting in his black sedan. We drove toward the hills, where the glowing lights of Mark's new mansion cut through the dark like a beacon of arrogance. Arthur asked, checking the thick manila envelope in his lap. I replied. As we pulled up to the gate, the valet looked confused, seeing an older man in a high-end suit, but I didn't wait for his permission. I walked through the massive front doors. The house was filled with the city's elite, local politicians, business owners, and all of Sarah's high society friends. Music was playing, and expensive appetizers were being carried around on silver trays. I saw Mark at the center of the room, holding a glass of my finest vintage scotch. He was bragging about his shrewd real estate investments. When his eyes met mine, his face went from a triumphant grin to a ghostly pale white. He almost dropped his glass. Sarah, standing next to him, in a dress that probably cost 3 months of my nursing home fees, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Mark stammered, rushing over to try and usher me toward a side room. "You're supposed to be... You're not well. You need to go back before you have an episode." "I've never been more lucid, Mark," I said, my voice projecting across the silent room. "In fact, I'm here to contribute to the celebration. You wanted my legacy, didn't you? Well, I'm here to give you exactly what you've earned." I signaled to Arthur, who began distributing copies of a single-page document to the guests nearby. It wasn't a flyer. It was a formal, quote, 54. The murmurs started instantly. Mark snatched a copy, his eyes scanning the lines as the blood drained from his lips. He saw the numbers. He saw the legal headers. And most importantly, he saw the name of the primary creditor, the Biological Debt Trust. The room went deathly silent. Mark's hands were shaking so hard, the paper rattled. I said, my voice echoing off the marble walls they hadn't paid for yet, "You aren't my son." I pulled a second document from Arthur's folder, the DNA results from 1995. I held it up for everyone to see. 30 years ago, I found out your mother was unfaithful. I knew the truth before you could even walk. But I loved the idea of a family, so I made a deal with her. Every cent I spent on you was legally categorized as a private loan to her estate, to be repaid upon her death or the liquidation of my assets. By selling my house and taking my money, you triggered the repayment clause. Sarah let out a high-pitched scream. "This is fake. You're just a senile old man trying to ruin us." "Actually," Arthur stepped forward, his voice calm and professional. "As the court-appointed trustee, I can confirm that the power of attorney Mark signed actually contained a hidden acknowledgement of these debts. By seizing your father's funds, Mark, you legally accepted the liability of your biological mother's estate. You don't own this mansion. The trust does. And as of 5 minutes ago, we are initiating a total asset freeze." Mark looked around at his wealthy friends, who were now whispering and backing away as if he had a contagious disease. He had spent years pretending to be a self-made success, but in 1 minute, I had stripped him down to what he really was, a fraud living on stolen time. "I gave you everything, Mark," I said, walking closer until I was inches from his pale face. "I gave you my name, my home, and my love. But you grew greedy. You tried to throw me away like trash to save a few dollars. Now you're going to learn what it's like to actually earn a living. The cars, the jewelry, this house, it's all being seized to settle the debt. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Mark collapsed onto his knees, the DNA report fluttering to the floor. He wasn't crying because he lost a father. He was crying because he lost the money. That was all I needed to see to know I had done the right thing. As the sun rose the next morning, I watched from the back of Arthur's car as the movers began hauling Sarah's expensive new furniture out of the mansion. Mark stood on the sidewalk, clutching a single gym bag, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He tried to call me one last time, but I had already blocked his number. The debt was settled, the house was being sold to a legitimate buyer, and the proceeds were going exactly where they belonged, into a foundation for retired investigators. But the biggest surprise wasn't the revenge, it was what came after. During this whole process, I had reconnected with Elena, a woman I had worked with years ago.
She was the only person who knew my secret back then, the only one who didn't judge me for staying. Now we are traveling through Europe together, enjoying the wealth I worked so hard to build. I'm no longer a, quote, 64 prisoner. I'm a man who finally has a life built on truth instead of a 30-year-old lie. Mark and Sarah are now living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment, working entry-level jobs to pay off the remaining legal fees. They learned the hard way that you should never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand belongs to a man who knows how to track every penny. I finally feel at peace. I'm healthy, I'm free, and I'm with someone who loves me for who I am, not for what's in my bank account. Looking back, I wonder if I was too harsh. I gave him 30 years of a perfect life, and he gave me a week in a concrete cell. Do you think I did the right thing by waiting so long to reveal the truth? Or was my revenge a step too far? What would you have done if you found out your child wasn't yours, only to have them betray you decades later? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and want to make sure you never miss another story like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible tales to life. The end. Thank you for listening.